99.5 FM. Kite Radio.
It is now 19 hours 30 and it is about time we enter room 592 where we unleash the truth with Dr. Yog Mahadeo alongside his co-host, senior journalist of Kite News, Leonard Gildari. This evening, their guest, Orin Gordon, a media consultant and former editor-in-chief of Trinidad Guardian. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening to you, and thank you, Kevin Smith, and thank you, Josh. And let me say good night to my co-host, Leonard Gildari, and of course, to our special guest tonight, Mr. Orin Gordon. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. Leonard, how are you this warm evening here in Guyana?
Well, pretty good, considering that consecutive nights we have two broadcasters. One was with BBC and the other one was with GBC. And it's good to know that they're both Guyanese. One is Ron Sanders and the other one happens to be Mr. Orin Gordon. Pleasure meeting you, sir.
I'm also both BBC and GBC, so
great.
Let me say that from the outset, okay?
Very good.
I was going to say that. And Mr. Gordon, Orin, if we may. Orin, last night we were, we had a distinguished gentleman, Mr. Ron Saunders, Sir Ron Saunders, on our program here. And it was an interesting discussion. A week ago, we had Sir James Mitchell, former Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That too was very interesting. And both of these gentlemen were very outspoken about what's happening in Guyana. But let me say welcome to our viewers and listeners all across Guyana, the Caribbean, and of course the wider world, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to room 592, where we unleash the truth. And ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a special guest, a very special person who, like our previous guest, also has Guyana at heart. Literally, mentally, figuratively, anyhow you turn it, twist it, he has a great care for this country and for our viewers and listeners all across Guyana, the Caribbean. And I want to tell you also that Mr. Gordon has some unique yet distinguishing experience from which we can all benefit. And I want to share some with you, just three maybe. He sat as the editor-in-chief of the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian. And trust me, for those of you who have had any linkages with people who work at a newspaper, I can tell you the job of an editor-in-chief is no small feat. It is no small thing to thump your nose at. Mr. Leonard Gildari is just an editor, not editor-in-chief, and his life has been miserable over many years. One could imagine how the editor-in-chief would have felt the squeeze from every single direction, 360 degrees. And we'll get to that in a moment. Uniquely to all of you accountants out there, Mr. Gordon was also the head. Are you still, Orin? Head of the...
No, I was the Caribbean CEO for ACCA, the Association of Certified Accountants. It's an international body of professional accountants. That was an interesting sideways move, but I'm not a professional accountant, but it was a CEO and management position.
Very good. And I'll have you know I'm an FCCA myself. I'm a chartered accountant, so I would have seen the news when you took the position there.
You're a fellow. You're a senior accountant.
That's right. That's right. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gordon, Orin, has also served the ACCA, one of the most distinguished accounting bodies internationally. And, you know, he brings a lot of experience. In fact, Leonard, Mr. Gordon visited Guyana as he sought to expand the ACCA's discipline and to get the Guyanese government more interested and more aware of what ACCA is and the potential. And of course, a lot of Guyanese are accountants, having qualified chartered accountants of the ACCA. Uniquely too, ladies and gentlemen, Orin also has a background of being a correspondent, a journalist with the BBC. And so one could imagine that his stint with the BBC would have also opened a lot of experience for him. And Orin, as we welcome you to room 592, my brother, from your Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, I must say to you that welcome to room 592, where you will find the temperature warmer than you are in Trinidad, because here We have a never-ending election fever, sir. Welcome.
Do you mean warmer or hotter?
You are right. Hotter, much. It is hotter here. So welcome to the program, sir, and we want to just get right into it. You're in Trinidad. You have sat in the seat of editor-in-chief. You have looked at Trinidad elections, and those are no small things to talk about. The Trinidad election has been, has captured everybody's attention when it happened. And you also would have been managing, editor-in-chief of a newspaper in a country that population is very similar to Guyana in terms of its demographics. Orin, what are your thoughts over these past couple of days when you look at the Guyana scenario with regards to our elections 2020, sir?
Thank you for having me, first of all. That was a very broad question. There's something I want to say at the outset, Yog. And this is from long experience of having Facebook debates. I'm aware that Guyana is very heavily politicized. And so I want to say at the outset, I don't have a tribe. I don't have an offer. I don't have a horse in the race, a dog in the fight, or whatever you want to say. I'm not PPP. I'm not PNC. I have never voted in a Guyanese election. You can take whatever view you want of that. But whatever conclusion I come to is because I'm employing a brain that God gave me and the excellent opportunity and the excellent education that Burnham gave me all those years ago. So let's start off by saying that.
If there was ever a disclaimer, Leonard, that was it.
Yes, because the thing that happens in political discourse in Guyana is that when you say something without fear or favor, you get put in a box. And I want to make it plain to everybody watching and listening to your program.
Is it unique to Guyana, Orin, or is it?
No, it isn't unique to Guyana, but it's particularly pervasive in Guyana and tiresomely so. I needed and wanted to say that at the outset. Whatever I say to you by way of a conclusion is because I'm employing my logical brain, not because I have a horse in the race. Okay.
Thank you.
So you mentioned Trinidad and Tobago is where I happen to be living. And the smart money is on Trinidad and Tobago having elections in August. And it would not surprise me if their elections come and go and they know who won their elections before we do. Let us look at the numbers involved in the Guyana elections. We have a voters list of just over 500,000, somewhere between, I stand corrected, between 500,000 and 600,000. The Guyana Elections Commission, GCOM, had the better part of a year to prepare for elections. The size of Guyana's electoral register is a small town in India or a small town in Nigeria. You mean to tell me that 3 months down the line, this is the 3rd month anniversary of our voting, June the 2nd. 3 months down the line, Guyanese are unable to make a determination of who won the election? And that is where I start as a baseline to everything that I'm going to say tonight. That level of incompetence and dysfunction is not acceptable. Our voters list, let's put things in perspective. Let's step outside of our Guyanese experience. Our voters list is tiny. Our electoral machinery is small. We should have known on the night of March 2nd who won the election. And the losers should have made a graceful concession, and the winners should have taken up their position. If you're the government, as a re-elected government, if you're the opposition, as a newly elected government. This is not acceptable, and we should start with that as a baseline position. So to all the people talking about a redo and stuff like that, I'm not one of those people who favors that kind of thing, because I think that the Guyana Elections Commission had more than enough time to get this right. I think that for an electoral register the size of Guyana's, we had a ton of time to get it right. I've covered elections in the United States. I covered the primary contest between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. If I'm not mistaken, the voters of New York are voting tonight in their primary. And Guyana's population is 2 times the size of one of the small big towns in the state of New York, Buffalo, New York. And they will know before we go to bed tonight, the results of that primary election, particularly the contest between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, right? So we as Guyanese should bring, to me, a greater level of self-respect to the process. We should have as a baseline position that the state we are in, irrespective of the parties we support, the state we are in, given our numbers, given the prep time that we had, is simply not acceptable. And that is the point of view that I take. That is the view that I take.
Thank you. Orin, what are your colleagues in Trinidad? What are they saying about these goings on in Guyana presently?
People can't believe that 3 months after an election, we don't know who won. They can't believe it. If Trinidad has an election tomorrow on Wednesday, by Wednesday night, they will know who won the election. It's the normal state of affairs. You said the 2 countries are very similar, and you're right about that. But Trinidad's numbers are a little higher than Guyana's. People cannot believe, and they poke fun at me and other Guyanese about it.
I could imagine.
People cannot believe that 3 months down the line, with a voters register of 500,000 people, we have not determined the winner. And to me, that is slackness of the highest order.
Correct. Now, let's talk a little bit of the economics, because your oil would have been on the downward slope. Our oil is yet, we are yet to experience.
My oil and Guyanese too, my brother.
Thank you. Well, our oil is now on the emerging slope, and Trinidad's oil is on the down and out. However, over the past year, the Trinidad economy would have looked towards Guyana with a lot of hope, as the entire Caribbean would have looked towards Guyana with a lot of hope, because here is where, with the decimation and everything else has been happening to, the tourism industry, your sugar, our sugar, and everything else, this oil was going to be a life-saving for the entire Caribbean. What do you think would now be within the mindset of the business people in Trinidad that might have looked towards Guyana for its opportunities that it could have afforded them?
2 years ago, I was in Guyana. Just around March, just over. It was 2 years ago. Time has flown in the interim, and I made a joke to my colleague that you can barely swing an elbow in the lobby of the Marriott without striking a Trini, right? In Guyana, looking for business opportunities, and a Trini from the oil and gas sector. So I don't think that the view of Guyana as a real opportunity for them, as a real business opportunity for them, I don't think that view has changed. People are perplexed about how our electoral mechanism is so dysfunctional, but I don't think their view of Guyana's potential has changed. Now, the petroleum sector in Trinidad and Tobago has its own difficulties, as you said, in framing the question. And so the Trinidad and Tobago companies in particular are looking to Guyana for opportunities. Remember, in the oil industry, in oil and gas, it's not just about the big companies like Exxon. It's about the small service companies.
Correct.
You might run a service company that supplies hoses to pump oil, or a company that washes hoses, or a company that supplies seamen and seawomen for the rigs. So there are lots of service companies that serve the big companies like the Exxons, and a lot of them came to Guyana in the past couple of years to look for opportunities. And I don't think that their view of Guyana and its promise has gone away, because the numbers for Guyana are quite staggering. Last time I looked, more and more new discoveries are being made. Last time I looked, Guyana's discovered oil reserves stood at 12 times that of, a dozen times that of Trinidad and Tobago's, and Trinidad and Tobago has been in this game for a long time.
Correct.
And also, Guyana's reserves catapulted it from 0 to about 28th or 25th among oil-producing countries in the world, in which there are about 100. So I don't even think, Yog and Leonard, that Guyanese realize how big this thing is, how massive our potential is. But the people who are into oil and gas in Trinidad and Tobago know about the potential of Guyana. And I want to make a point about this. I am totally fine. As a citizen of CARICOM, I worked with BBC Caribbean. I live in Trinidad. I'm from Guyana. I see myself as a Caribbean citizen, and I do believe in my heart and in my soul in the free movement of skills initiative. And as a citizen of CARICOM, I have no problems with Trinidadians and Tobagonians coming together and look for opportunity. I would rather see a bunch of Trinis marching around Georgetown than a bunch of Texans. And that is me being frank, right? 90 miles, not 90 miles, but 1 hour from Guyana resides a lot of oil and gas expertise in Trinidad and Tobago. And we'd be stupid if we did not take advantage of that expertise that resides right on our doorstep. And also, Trinidad and Tobago has a very high proportion of educated people and a very high level of expertise. It's a country that's got a lot going for it. I live here, and I recognize that. So I think we should welcome that interest on the part of Trinidad and Tobago.
Correct.
Small companies in our sector.
And there is another aspect to it, isn't it? I mean, the oil companies presently are between Trinidad and us. I mean, there are times that they would go across to the Trinidadian shores for things, or use that as the airlift from Trinidad. And there are times that they would use Guyana as the point of their airlift. But most particularly, Orin, whatever happens on those drill and all the stations out there, it will also be of concern to all of the Caribbean countries. Here is where I'm coming from. We are extremely concerned that with a lack of oversight, Guyana has allowed Exxon to flare over 9 billion cubic feet of gas. Over 9 billion, and it continues. That burning is not only just literal burning of money, because we could have used that gas, we could have helped people with it, it could have earned revenues, but it is also a killer to the environment. Has there been any discussions in Trinidad that you might have been aware of, or concerns in your own mind with regards to what's happening out there at environmental protection and environmental care?
The flaring issue you mentioned, I'm a guy who does not hesitate to say he doesn't know. I don't know a lot about that. I would have to look into this. But I would say with regard to Exxon, Exxon is one of the biggest listed companies on any stock exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, the Houston Stock Exchange, or wherever. So Exxon has a market capitalization that's larger than maybe all but 5 countries in the world.
Correct.
So when we sit down with the likes of Exxon to negotiate agreements or startup deals, we got to come good, as you're saying, Guyana. We did not have the expertise to match Exxon's, and that was a lesson to us. So maybe with going forward with future agreements, we're going to have to buy that expertise. And by that, I mean go to wherever the expertise resides, whether it's in Houston, Texas, or London, England. Correct. And sometimes you got to tell yourself, I'll pay $2 million to save myself $2 billion down.
That's right.
Because we cannot compete with Exxon in the boardroom, in the negotiating room, or with respect to legal firepower. They have an army of lawyers working for them. Right. So and they have been doing this business for a long time. So when you go into a negotiating room with a company as big and as powerful as Exxon, you gotta come good. I'm not criticizing Exxon. I am one Guyanese who will not criticize Exxon for striking as favorable a deal to themselves as possible. That is what business is all about. That's what happens when you mix with the big boys and the big girls.
Correct.
You just have to make sure you're prepared. You have all the baseline data that would aid in your negotiating position, and that if you yourself lack the expertise, you buy it, you hire it, and you bring it in.
Of course, you should be prepared going in. Yeah, you should be prepared going into that negotiating room.
You should be prepared going in. I have zero words of criticism of Exxon for the deals that they managed to strike with Canada. I don't even buy into the notion that it's exploitative. It's business, and in business, you try to strike as favorable a deal for yourself as possible. Yes, as a Guyanese, I'd have liked to see us get more out of these deals, but they struck as favorable a deal as possible. With respect to the environment, very quickly, because Gregory wants to jump in, I can see. One of the reasons it's important that we resolve our political impasse is that we need to create within our parliaments and within our legal system a framework for operating and engaging, and an important part of that framework is environmental protections. What are the protections going to be, and what are the penalties going to be to Exxon and other operators for inadvertently or deliberately breaching those environmental protections, your environmental ecosystem, your environmental system is very, very important.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And just before you come in, Leonard, I just want to tell our viewers and listeners, we continue to discuss the environment, notwithstanding the politics, because it is, as Orin said, extremely important. And yes, there is a great difference between venting and flaring. And the objective has to have been to tap it, to ensure that you can get the economic value from it. And that discussion will continue on Monday when we turn again to the environment, as we invite a group of environmentalists to join us again on Monday coming. But we'll get to that another time. Leonard, your question.
Yes, absolutely. And I must tell Orin, I think it was in 2015 when we saw that article, the report came out, that you became the editor-in-chief of the newspaper in Trinidad there. We were extremely happy. I think Kaiser News would have carried a reprint of that article there. So congrats. We're very proud of you, sir. But I want to ask you.
And I have to say that I was very warmly received. I came down again as head of a year later, and I was very warmly received by the Prime Minister Moses Nagamoto as a Guyanese returning, and I'd like to thank him for that.
Well, we have a couple of big companies here, Orin, from Trinidad, Massey, Republic Bank, Ansel McCall. I think Schlumberger has the original office in Trinidad as well. Have you heard any indications how they intend to treat with the government? Let's say Guyana has a government that is not so recognized by the rest of the world, an illegal government, if you will. Has there been any indications as to how these companies are going to treat with that situation, a scenario like that?
This is one of the reasons why it's very important that we settle the question of who won the Ghana elections, that the president, if he won, President Granger, if he won, is sworn in for his second term, or if there is a President Irfan Ali to take the oath of office. And so it's very important, not just, as we said a short time ago, from the standpoint of legislatively crafting an environmental framework, but investors and companies with whom you do business take their cues from the political directorate. So let's say, for the sake of argument, I'm not advocating it, but let's say for the sake of argument that the U.S. State Department saw it fit, Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump saw it fit to impose sanctions on Guyana or on the political directorate. That creates a problem in terms of companies being able to do business with you, because one of the things that sanctions prevent is the normal pursuit of business, the repatriation of funds, the movement of money, the movement of people, the movement of skills. Sanctions mean sanctions. You can't transfer monies and cash and revenue in the same way. You can't move people around in the same way. The people in your political directorate are prevented from freely traveling in the same way. They're prevented from, both as individuals and as a country, from accessing any foreign accounts that might be present in the country imposing the sanctions. You could decide, maybe if Guyana and Exxon had a payment facility at Bank of America, a sanction would freeze that payment facility and make it difficult for Guyana to receive the proceeds of the sale of its oil. So this is what an uncertain political climate does. And there's another thing that it does that is not readily recognized by people, in that the cost of doing business goes up. There are ratings agencies that assess all kinds of factors, and then they assign you an index in terms of the ease of doing business. Let's say we want to borrow money as a country not under sanction. The rate of interest, let's say for the sake of argument, is 2%. If you're a country under sanction, the rate of interest is 10% or more, because you represent a higher risk to the investors. So these are things to consider. I also know that, as a practical matter, Nigel Hughes has set up an office in Houston, Texas. If the government was sanctioned, he would not be able to do business as readily at the Texas end as if the government was not sanctioned. And I think that's a laudable initiative. I think that more Guyanese should go to the source and try to do what he did. But if sanctions were imposed, that would totally transform the picture. So economic stability, the relation of economic stability to business is a very, very strong and important one.
Correct. Leonard, just before you step in there, I just want to throw a little spin into our room 592 tonight. It's a no spin zone. So I want to bring this in for allowing our viewers and listeners to determine whether it is spin or what is it. Orin, I don't know how keenly you would have been following what's going on, but as of this morning, there would have been letters. The chairman of GCOM would have written to the police, commissioner of police, seeking those persons who are not, whether they were in country or not, those persons, whether they were in country or not, because there's allegations about persons who are not in country having voted. And I think there is a letter that came out this afternoon, Leonard, that the Guyana Police Force notes the publication by Kaiser News under the caption, "Top Cop Gave False Information to Claudette Singh." And the administration of the force iterates that migration data produced by the Immigration Department of the Guyana Police Force is generated through its record system, which includes an electronic border management system. This system, however, does not record persons who traveled illegally. Hence, the Guyana Police Force stands by the information provided to the Guyana Elections Commission recently and therefore refutes the article mentioned. So the Guyana Commissioner of Police has refuted your article, the article in Kaiser News, Leonard. I know you guys would have seen this letter, but they're basically saying if you are in country and you're on that list, it means you're here illegally. And that is a very, very, very wide statement to make that I'm not sure whether Orin would want to comment on, but I want to add something else to it. Today, as we all know, viewers and listeners, in the Artichoke Convention Center, as the recount is ongoing, APNO AFC, one of the parties in the process, would have listed or called out a number of observations, making a number of observations by calling out serial numbers. So say these people, they're lodging a complaint that these people are not in the country on March 2nd, and so they could not have voted. That's a complaint they're lodging. Leonard, one of the persons that that is listed.
I know where you're coming from.
Yeah, one of the persons listed there on this listing for Region 4 is a well-known lawyer and attorney at law, practicing attorney at law in Guyana, who is practicing, living here, and has been an observer in these elections, a local observer. And, you know, we have invited the gentleman to come. Hopefully he gets some time to come on. If he doesn't, then tomorrow he will join us certainly. But this is, Orin, the back and forth, moving and shifting of the goalposts. And this is what I want to bring you to. On March, was it March 5th or March 8th? I think it was, Leonard, when Mingo made, March 4th, Mingo made that declaration. The court threw it out, Orin. 2 weeks later, Mingo made another declaration that is now under contempt proceedings in the court. 2 months later, it took GCOM all of 2 months. Let us be generous and say 1 month, because the Ulita Moore case came in. GCOM took a month to get its act ready to have the recounting process. Nobody, Orin, over those processes, nobody said they had a concern about migrant voters. They had a concern about dead people, ghosts voting. They had a concern about duplicate votes across the country. Finally, Orin, to cap it all off, what is being said is that apparently the opposition parties seem to have bought out, bribed all of the returning officers, all of the polling officers, all of the APNU, PPP, LJP, all of the agents, all of the policemen in every polling station, so that having bought them out, they allowed 50,000 people to go into all of these stations across the country and vote multiple times. That's the story as of today. Maybe they're not putting it over like that, but when you ask, when you query the logic, that is what it relates to. And my friend, that if we have said consistently, if this was not such a serious matter of our governance, our government, and the future of this country, it would have been a big joke. What are your thoughts with that, Orin?
As I said to you at the start of the program, I am going to say things based on the brain that God gave me and the education that Burnham gave me, right? I am going to make logical, intelligent deductions. And the first thing I wish to say is this. Joe Harmon and Aubrey Norton and the leaders of the charge on the APNU AFC side, they have an uphill battle making these claims stick. And let us examine the claims from a purely mathematical point of view, because it's going to come down to hard maths. The first thing that the recount will determine is the margin of victory or margin of loss, depending on who won or lost, right? And so the second thing coming out of that is going to be determined is how many cases of these irregularities occurred. So therefore, if your margin is, say, 10,000 and you prove 300 cases, then you can say, based on the numbers, based on the math, that it didn't have an effect on the outcome. If your margin is 4,000 and you have 3,500 cases of, or 3,600 cases, provable cases of irregularities, then you have a problem. The gentleman, the esteemed gentleman of APNU AFC haven't, as far as I can tell, I stand corrected by anybody on that side or any other side, I haven't yet produced the evidence of a scale of shenanigans that would be determinative, that would change the outcome of an election. Perhaps in the next 2 weeks, that evidence will be presented. But in the past few days, we have seen people coming forward to say that you said I was abroad, but I was here. Here's the proof. You said I was dead, but I'm alive. Here's the proof, and that sort of thing. So the burden of proof is considerable, and it'll be an uphill battle proving that. But what does my logical brain tell me? GCOM spent a considerable amount of time getting to a state of readiness for the elections. There was a little hiatus before the president had to do the constitutional thing and get the ball rolling. GCOM spent a considerable amount of time, the better part of a year, preparing to get to the election. At the point at which GCOM said, "Be ready to go," were these objections made? I don't recall those objections being made. At the point at which the elections were held, the day after, the few days after, were these objections made and were these concerns raised? I don't recall that as being the case. These objections and these concerns, it seemed to me, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to be fair. It seemed to me that these objections and these concerns occurred in the course of the recount. And I look at something called, as a coach, I look at something called body language, right? Is side A or side B acting as if they are the winners of an election? I'm not going to answer my own question. I'm going to leave it out there. By your actions, are you acting and carrying on as if you won this thing? Or are you acting and carrying on as if you expect to lose the recount or win the recount? And I leave it there for you to figure out with the brain that God gave you.
Thank you. Leonard.
The brain that Barnum give me. I'm not sure.
No, God gave you the brain. Burnham gave you the education. The education from nursery to university.
I want to bring you with your hat on as the editor-in-chief, Orin. How could you tell us a little of your experiences? Have you been able in Trinidad, been at the helm of that newspaper, the Trinidad Guardian, and over or directed your colleagues, your staffers to go cover elections? What has it been like? Has media houses been told that they're vultures? Have they been told that they're fake news? Could you tell us a little about the experience in Trinidad?
Yes, I was in charge of the paper when we covered the 2015 general election it was October or September. I think it was September. Forgive me, old age does that to you. But I was in charge of the paper at that time. And you mentioned editor-in-chief several times. I should also point out that I was editor-in-chief of Guyana Broadcasting Corporation from 1992 to 1994.
You know,
that it's important.
Yes,
it's important.
They were my formative years in Guyana, and yeah, I should make that clear to you. With respect to fake news and all the rest of it, I think the thing that as an editor, the thing that you try to impart is a sense of fairness. You must approach all your reporting, but especially at election time, from a point of view of being rigorously fair. You must not have an agenda. You must not take a side, and you should try to give equal time and balance and all the rest of it. That is the mindset that you try to bring to elections. I remember I was in a completely different role. I was covering the Jamaica elections. I think it was 2007. For BBC, they sent me on assignment to Jamaica. That was the election that a guy you may or may not have heard of, Bruce Golding, won. He beat Portia. Portia Simpson Miller. He beat Portia, the incumbent prime minister.
Yes.
And he won that election. And what I tried to do was to cover both campaigns. I covered the campaign of Andrew Holness, who I didn't know would go on to himself become prime minister one day. I covered the campaigning in his constituency, and I covered Portia's campaigning in her constituency. You've got to try as much as you can to have a rigorous balance. And what we did in the Trinidad and Tobago elections in 2015, we concentrated on the marginals, because Trinidad and Tobago has a system that I like and I wish we had in Guyana. They have a constituency system. And so I wish that I had an MP for North Rheinfeld and Festival City, where I'm from, and that he or she sat in Parliament, and you had an MP for Plaisance, and you had an MP for Bedavo acting or whatever. I think such a transformation would make our political system a lot better than it is. I think that when you have constituency MPs, you're answerable to your constituents, because if you're not performing, they will kick you out, irrespective of which party you're in. So it reduces centralized control of the House of Assembly. It makes MPs more independent. It makes you more accountable to your constituents. And so Trinidad and Tobago had a system of had that system, and there were constituencies where the balance between the UNC and the PNM was so fine that it could go either way, and those were the most exciting constituencies to cover, because really those contests could have gone either way. And also, lastly, since you asked the question, I did train the people on the TV side, our sister TV station, CNC3. I trained all of the TV presenters in field presentation, how to cover the issues seriously from the field. So that in total was how, from my perch as editor-in-chief of the Guardian, I approached the 2015 general election.
And is it true you were a fast bowler?
No, you got the wrong guy.
Okay.
I went to Queen's College with, and a few years above me, there was another guy called Orin Gordon. I think he had the same name as me, but people in Linden would recognize him because I think he worked in the bauxite industry for a long time. He was bigger than me. He was stronger than me. He was more athletic than me. I was a Pagali banner from first Mix. So I didn't play any sport with any sort of distinction or ability. So I was not the cricketer.
And I guess as editor-in-chief of local and in Trinidad, you had to be good at spin, though. But Orin, one of our viewers has sent in a question. What are your thoughts about the way observers, international observers, were treated during these elections in Guyana?
I think I was an observer one time. I had left the BBC by then. I was an independent reporter and analyst and consultant, and the Commonwealth picked me on a team to observe elections in Lesotho, which is a small landlocked country in southern Africa. It's totally surrounded by South Africa. Very beautiful, mountainous, but they have winters in the summertime in the wrong time of year. But anyway, I digress. People who are picked to observe elections are very savvy people, are very politically savvy people. There's a reason that election observer teams are headed by former heads of government and heads of state, because they have been in the fire of political fights and contests, and they know the system intimately. We were fortunate to have two of them. We had Bruce Golding, former Prime Minister of Jamaica. We had Owen Arthur, former Prime Minister of Barbados. These guys are politically savvy. Owen Arthur, for example, headed a Commonwealth team. And the Commonwealth team would have been comprised of people with media backgrounds like myself, people with electoral systems backgrounds from a range of Commonwealth countries, and they tried to balance it between Asia, the Pacific, and the Caribbean, and so on. So you have a broad range of people and expertise. Those people are not stupidity. They are smart people, they're politically savvy people, they run election systems in their countries, and they know what they're about. So the notion that you could railroad them into a groupthink in a particular direction is ludicrous. So I see people I see my friends, I have civil and not so civil discussions on Facebook with them. I see people trying to make the observers the enemy, but the observers are not the enemy. The observers are not the enemy, and they're not stupid. And thirdly, they're not tramplers on our sovereignty. They're there to do a job. And they are there to call it as they see it. Now, it's been said that Bruce Golding visited the house of the opposition leader at one time. How do we know that? Bruce Golding, in his presentation in the process of accepting the role, made the disclosure himself. And he said to the OAS hierarchy, if you think that this is disqualifying, get somebody else. He himself made the disclosure, right? And in the course of running countries, people become friends. And they
course.
see each other. And Ralph Gonsalves is one guy who is a serial friend with every prime minister and political leader up and down the Caribbean. I'm not saying that observers are perfect and they don't make mistakes, but I am mystified by the notion that the observers are the enemy. Now, the Carter Center has a problem. And their problem is that Jason Carter is merely the grandson of Jimmy Carter. He never headed a country. So he doesn't have the clout of Jimmy Carter or a Bruce Golding or an Owen R. Phelps. So I think it was not that difficult for the president to tell him, no, we're not relaxing our pandemic strictures for you. And I think that once the president made the determination as a sovereign leader of the country, no should have meant no. And Mr. Carter should have ceased exerting the pressure and should have perhaps looked to local proxies to fill that role.
Correct.
But all in all, I would say that the observers had a job to do. And they did the job. What the observers did, very importantly, was to stop a process that our own courts, to stop the result of a process. I'm being very careful with what I say. To stop the result of a process that our own courts said was illegal. And as a Guyanese, how could I be vexed with the observers for helping us to course correct in that man? I don't see that they did anything that I can take objection to.
Right. Leonard?
Yes, and so I want to ask you along the same vein, Orin. Have you seen the rhetoric has been raised against the embassies, the representatives like the ambassadors, the ABC and EU countries? Have you seen anything like that across the Caribbean in your coverage in Trinidad, elsewhere?
I have not been following that part of things with respect to Ghana, but I know that elections are very fraught times, right? And look, I think the ambassadors are big boys and girls. I saw an excellent interview between Lillian Chatterjee, the Canadian High Commissioner, and Gordon Mosley, and Gordon did a tremendous job on that interview. And she came across as somebody who could handle herself. Elections are punches get thrown. They're robust affairs, and I don't see anything wrong with punches being thrown as long as not slanderous or anything like that. People are big boys and girls. You have to remember that in 2015, the results in May 2015, the margin between Granger and Ramatar was very, very slender. And if you remember, Ramatar seemed very reluctant to leave office. Who were the people that convinced him that he had to leave, that although the margin was narrow, nothing happened in the elections to invalidate the result? It was the observers and the foreign embassies and the ABC countries that told him he had to leave.
That's right.
So, on the APNU side, they loved them 5 years ago, but they don't love them so much now. And if the wheel turns in 5 years' time, perhaps the PPPC will love them less. That's the nature of the game. Elections are very robust affairs, so I think they're big boys and girls, and they can take it.
Great. Well, Orin, we are down with our program time, and won't you know, an hour has passed by. It's been great to have you in room 592. We certainly look forward to a repeat of this sometime after the elections are over, hopefully. That is, sir, after the Guyanese elections are over, hopefully, not the Trinidadian elections. I certainly look forward to another such chat because we need to keep the discussion going. And also, from the perspective of maintaining a Caribbean conversation, we need to have conversations like these going with different persons across the media fraternity and the business fraternity in the different countries in the Caribbean. So your final thoughts as we wrap up our program tonight, Oring.
But before he gets into play, I like the fact that you remember the word pagli.
I was about half the size I was. I was completely athletically uncoordinated. These glasses look too big for my face. So I could not be a fast bowler of any repute. Now, I want to say that Guyanese people, sometimes we must set certain baseline expectations, basic expectations of ourselves and our country. For an electoral register of our size, we need to know who won by 11 o'clock tonight. That's not asking too much. For an electorate of our size, we need to know that the competent authority can discharge it competently. That's not asking too much. For everybody, whether you're PNC, PPP, APNU, AFC, or whatever, you must be able to agree on basic set of facts. Facts should not be conditional on who you support. And I think that is our problem. This is a charcoal gray, a very stylish charcoal gray, long-sleeved polo shirt that I'm wearing. But somebody might be able to convince themselves that this is a pink shirt. If somebody whose political views are shared by them tells them that this is a pink shirt. And we as Guyanese need to get out of that. The Elections Commission has got to up its game. It's got to get this recount over as quickly as possible. And we need to know what the majority of voters in Guyana decided on the 2nd of March. I don't hold a brief by the side. I see fault in both sides. I think, for example, that the PPP Civic presidential candidate is one of the most unready presidential candidates that I have seen in a long, long time. And if your potential president can't travel to Canada because of charges hanging over him, you have a problem. And on the other side, I see I see an establishment that will pull out all the stops to not readily depart, even if the signs are that was the decision of the majority of the voters. I say plague on both houses. I sit squarely in the middle, and I have reservations about both of them. But whatever, in the end, what I feel is immaterial. What is important is that the elections authorities establish fairly, rigorously, who was the choice of the majority of Guyanese voters on the 2nd of March.
Correct. Well said, Orin. And you know, if somebody listened to these last 2 minutes, Leonard, they would say this gentleman is not an editor-in-chief, he's a diplomat. Well said, sir. And thank you so much, Mr. Orin Gordon, for joining us here in room 592. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Orin Gordon, Guyanese